It's Dr. Know-It-All coming to you from the car again. Apologies, I am driving back from my parents' house. And by the way, thank you to everyone who sent the good wishes to my mom. Don't want to get specific because it's her private stuff, but she's having some health issues. So anyway, all of your good thoughts are much appreciated for her. We will be back again fairly shortly. Anyway, so as I'm driving home, I wanted to first of all note that I just saw that Tesla has pretty substantially reduced the cost of supercharging in Europe, which is a great sign. Obviously, with the the thing that happened in Ukraine last February, over a year ago, well over a year ago now, it obviously caused a lot of energy instability in Europe, and so Tesla raised their prices for their superchargers, but they have just kind of reduced them, I think, more or less to the baseline that it was previous to the whole war. So anyway, that's a great sign for folks who are there, and let me know if you have noticed that yourself. The main thing I want to talk about, however, is that GM says that they have plans to release electric vehicles. They're going to go back to Europe as an EV only brand, which is a really interesting thing, and I kind of want to dig into this just a little bit. So first of all, as far as I remember, 2017 was the year that not Tesla that GM backed out of Europe entirely. They just said, nope, it's not profitable enough, we can't make it happen. And they said, hey, we're only going to be mostly in the United States and in China. And in China was their main profit driver. They had been really making a lot of profit and a lot of inroads into China in terms of profitability, and they were selling a lot of cars there and everything. So what has changed in between 2017 and now is obviously the China part of the equation. If you haven't seen all that stuff, I have a bunch of videos on that. I'll put a link to at least a couple of those in here. But basically, GM has been cut off at the knees. Their gas cars are almost unsellable now because of the bunch of very strict laws that China is putting into place. And they have very few EVs. Interestingly enough, Buick, for whatever reason, even though it's not much of a brand in the United States anymore, is a very popular brand apparently in China. And they released a Buick, I don't remember what the name of it was, but there's a new Buick EV that they just released in China, and it had 8,000 pre-orders in just a day or two. So obviously, the Chinese like their Buicks and they like their EVs, so they want those two things together. So anyway, the issue, of course, is that we saw that GM was producing and making profitably a lot of cars in China, selling a lot of cars in China, but that's not happening anymore because of the change in consumer tastes, not only because of the very strict laws, but also because of the change in consumer tastes. So there was a big alteration in terms of their capabilities in China, and so now it looks like what they're trying to do is move over and try to go into Europe instead and make money there instead. And interestingly enough, this past quarter they just passed Ford as the #2 EV maker in the United States. Now the numbers are kind of laughable because they passed Ford at 20,000 units for the quarter. And I can't remember exactly what Ford made, but it was somewhere around 10 or 11,000. So anyway, these numbers are pathetic, an order of magnitude less than what Tesla is producing per quarter in the United States. But the really interesting aspect of this is everyone is singing GM's praises for becoming the #2 auto manufacturer, but they did that on the back in the United States. They did that on the back of the Chevy Bolt. And what is GM doing with the Chevy Bolt? But they are canceling the Chevy Bolt as of somewhere around third quarter to fourth quarter of 2023. So the very thing that is causing them to be able to be the #2 EV manufacturer in the United States is the thing that they're cutting. And I think this also ties directly into GM selling exactly 2 Hummers last quarter, in EV Hummers, excuse me. But anyway, they only sold 2 EV Hummers last quarter, and so you might think to yourself, wait a second, you have to be able to produce more than 2 cars in a quarter. It doesn't even matter if it's a Lamborghini or a McLaren, something that's hand built. You could build more than 2 in a quarter. And certainly, why would they also be getting rid of their most popular car that sold 19,000 some odd vehicles, the Chevy Bolt? Why would they be getting rid of this vehicle that has jumped them up into number 2 after all the problems they had? Well, it's the same problem as the Hummer, in my opinion. Of course, I'm just speculating on this, but I believe that the issue is that they are just totally unprofitable. We saw that Ford, when they broke out their EV division, they said that when they make an EV vehicle, they're losing 110% on the vehicle. So they're not losing 10% on the vehicle. They're not selling it for $100,000 and it cost them $110,000. They're selling it for $55,000 or $50,000, excuse me, and they're losing $110,000 on the vehicle. So it's absolute insanity in terms of how unprofitable these vehicles are. And so my humble opinion about this is they don't want to produce very many Hummers because they cost a fortune. And I know the Hummers sell for 6 figures somewhere. It's somewhere on the order of $100,000, depending on the trim, all of that kind of stuff. But at a guess, based on what Ford is doing, it cost them probably $200,000 to $250,000 to build this. That's just a total guess on my part. But if you look at what Ford is talking about in terms of their lack of profit margins, it would make some sort of sense. And how motivated would you be not to produce a car that was losing you that kind of money? You don't want to lose over $100,000 per car. So if indeed, and again, speculation on my part, just to be clear, if indeed GM is losing that kind of money, that would explain more than anything else why the Hummer, the electric Hummer, only had 2 manufactured last quarter, because they have a bunch of pre-orders. People want the cars. At least some segment of the population does. I certainly don't want a car quite like that, but there is a segment of the population that wants that vehicle, and certainly they could produce hundreds or thousands of those things per quarter and they would sell. But if they're losing a huge amount of money per vehicle that they sell, they're highly motivated, obviously, not to build that vehicle. Same thing, I've got much more evidence about the Bolt, although I don't have it right in front of me right here. But the Bolt itself, it loses a lot of money, and so therefore, sorry, there's a truck merging on the highway. I need to see what's going to happen here. Sorry. The car did really well. It's on full self-driving, and it managed to thread that needle, so the truck was coming right in. Anyway, so the Bolt, I have much more evidence that they lose a good deal of money in every one of the cars that they produce. And they're selling the vehicle for around $30,000. And remember that even with the reduced tax credits of $3,750, if the batteries are being manufactured outside of the United States, they still get a big credit. So currently, what that means is, and forget about the $7,500 tax credit that goes to the consumer. Sorry, I shouldn't have said $3,750. But there's like credits you get for the batteries and all of that kind of stuff as you build these vehicles. But if GM is losing money while they're getting the Inflation Reduction Act credits to build their vehicle, that's kind of shockingly bad, right? It's one thing if they're losing that money prior to the IRA credits, because, whoa, that was a very big plane that just went overhead if you just heard a big loud noise. If they're losing money on the IRA credit, before the IRA credits, that's one thing. It's like, okay, maybe they were losing just a little bit of money, but with those credits, they should be making somewhere on the order of about $3,000 per vehicle, depending on the battery size and all that kind of stuff. But if they're still losing money after getting that kind of credit for building the vehicle, that's pretty sad, and it means that they can't really just raise the price of the vehicle by a couple $1,000s and try to make a profit. So those Bolts could be losing a lot of money. And I think what we're seeing from Ford is the first peek behind the curtain and what's actually going on. So remember, Tesla is an EV-only manufacturer. You get to see exactly how much profit and loss they make on EVs. But every other company, pretty much until Ford, has hidden that number behind their, they've said, here's all the cars that we sell and this is our profit and loss. But what we're seeing from Ford is that these numbers could be atrociously bad. And, GM has said that they need to manufacture their second generation electric vehicle in order for it to be very profitable or something along those lines. But I think what's really going on here is that their other vehicles are very unprofitable. So selling 20,000 vehicles is actually a bad thing for them. They actually want to sell less than that. So anyway, it's interesting that they are planning to go back to Europe as an EV-only brand. I think that's really fantastic that they're doing that. But again, that's plans. We'll see how it goes. They have plans to release a whole bunch of models into the United States, the Silverado, the Blazer, and one other vehicle. Anyway, but currently, the only one that they're making right now that is supposed to continue to be made over time is the Cadillac Lyriq, and that is only manufactured in very small numbers. So, you know, you see these companies really starting to struggle with trying to mass produce these vehicles, and of course the recession is not helping, and of course the fact that Tesla is reducing prices all the time and going, you know, as thin as they want to in their margins, and they can adjust daily, is also hurting these vehicle manufacturers. They're just not able to keep up, and I think that's what we're seeing evidence of, is that they're scrambling around trying to figure out how they're going to compete, and they have to get rid of their first generation vehicles in order to be profitable. Jim Farley, CEO of Ford, has said very specifically that they also have to move to their second generation vehicles in order to be profitable. So it's good for them that they're trying that. I think Ford is much further along. GM always talks about plans. They plan to go back to Europe. They say they're going to come back in the fall. You know, they plan to have these vehicles available in the United States in the fall. The only thing I'm pretty sure of is that they're going to stop manufacturing the Bolt, and if the Hummer is, as I think it is, losing as much money as it is, they may either be retooling, trying to come up with a Gen 2 version of the vehicle, or they may just slow roll that and try to make as few of those as possible so that they can say that they're making the car, but make as few as possible so they're not losing that much money on it. Anyway, I'll be interested to see how all of this stuff goes. I would love to know all of your opinion about this and what you all think about the situation, and maybe I'm totally wrong and that's not what GM is doing, and you have a better idea of what it is that they're doing and how they're competing with Tesla. But it's pretty fascinating to see that these companies that are making an order of magnitude less vehicles than Tesla are scrapping it out, but they're also throwing away a lot of their first generation vehicles because they just can't manufacture them profitably enough. So anyway, I'd be curious to know what you all think. Do all the liking and subscribing, go to the merch store, join my Patreon, YouTube membership, all of that good stuff. And in the meantime, I will see you back home in the next one. Bye-bye.